It wasn't a speech, a press conference, or even a policy memo. It was just 10 words, typed late at night, posted online, and sent shockwaves through the global auto industry like a silent explosion. If you don't make it here, don't sell it here. That single sentence, posted by President Donald J. Trump on Truth Social, triggered an immediate 200% tariff on all foreign-made vehicles and auto parts. No warning, no grace period, just instant disruption. The world didn't gradually realize what had happened. It was jolted awake by it. Analysts were stunned. Auto executives scrambled. Stellantis, more vulnerable than most, went radio silent within hours. No media responses. No official statements, just a sudden disappearance and a flurry of flights to Paris. What did Stellantis know before everyone else caught up? Why was Canada positioned to benefit almost instantly? And is this just a tariff? Or the beginning of something much more permanent? Within a day, Stellantis pulled the plug on the all-public-facing activity. Press events vanished. Product launches were halted. Even their social media accounts went completely dark. Stellantis' internal communications team sent urgent directives to halt all U.S. messaging to agencies in Chicago, Los Angeles, and New York. Leaked memos surfaced almost immediately. This company had frozen hiring across all U.S. operations. Plant investments were put on hold. Supplier contract renewals were suspended. Engineers in Michigan were instructed to prepare remote transition documents for alternative facilities. The unspoken message was unmistakable. Stellantis was pulling back. Inside statehouses across the industrial Midwest, the retreat had begun. Panic spread even faster than the news coverage. Union reps from Michigan, Ohio, and Illinois couldn't get a single response from the company. Rumors of plant closures exploded, but Stellantis offered no explanations, only silence. Workers in Toledo were the first to speak out, organizing, spontaneous press briefings outside factory gates, and demanding answers. Then came the bombshell. Canada's newly elected Prime Minister, Mark Carney, a globally respected figure, publicly backed Stellantis' move to scale down its U.S. presence, labeling the tariffs an act of economic self-sabotage. Carney extended a direct invitation to Stellantis: move operations to Canada and receive full government support, including taxpayer incentives. What followed was a layoff tsunami. The effects hit hard and fast. Within a week of Trump's tariff announcement, Stellantis quietly submitted worker adjustment and retraining notification. Warn. Notices across multiple states. More than 12,000 layoffs were confirmed, with additional cuts expected. The first closure was the Jeep plant on Detroit's east side, quickly followed by a Dodge facility in Belvidere, Illinois. There was no notice, no assistance, no transition, period. Workers were simply told not to report. Some arrived at the gates only to find them padlocked, with paper signs directing them to call a hotline that never picked up. Local officials were caught off guard. Mayors held press conferences, their voices cracking as they admitted they'd received no advance warning. In school districts reliant on auto industry tax revenue, budget crisis projections were immediate. Businesses linked to Stellantis, from restaurants and tool shops to auto glass suppliers, began cutting staff or closing their doors altogether. Then a leaked recording from a company conference call pushed the outrage into overdrive. In the audio, a Stellantis executive was heard stating that the United States had become too volatile to trust for long-term investment. The quote spread like wildfire. Protests erupted outside Stellantis buildings, with signs reading, "We built you," and "Too volatile, too profitable." As the US staggered under the weight of the fallout, Canada surged into action. Within 48 hours of Stellantis' retreat, Prime Minister Carney's administration unveiled a sweeping economic fast-track program aimed at advanced manufacturing. Ontario and Quebec were first in line, receiving instant subsidies while permitting timelines were slashed from 18 months to just 8 weeks. The Canadian Broadcasting Corporation ran non-stop coverage, proudly showing politicians shaking hands with Stellantis executives at newly launched regional offices. By the second week, something surreal unfolded across shuttered plants in Michigan and Ohio. Flatbed trucks with Canadian license plates began arriving. Equipment, robotic welders, precision die presses, custom jigs, was dismantled, loaded up, and hauled across the border. Videos began circulating online, former American workers standing in silence as their own machinery was driven away under foreign flags. One heartbreaking clip showed a tearful employee watching his former workstation roll past on a trailer bound for Ontario. That moment became the defining image of what many now called Detroit's new surrender. Meanwhile, Canadian labour unions erupted in celebration. Unifor, Canada's largest private sector union, held rallies cheering the incoming jobs and denouncing Trump's tariff move as gift-wrapped industrial self-destruction. Social media, once filled with Detroit muscle car nostalgia, now lit up with Canadian flags draped over Jeep chassis. We've tracked the leaked memos, border footage, and internal union briefings to map exactly how Canada executed this play. Fast, quiet, and surgical. Now you have the full playbook Stellantis used to walk away from America in plain sight. If clarity like this matters to you, consider subscribing, because this story is far from over. Through it all, Stellantis stayed silent, operating with a cold precision that couldn't be mistaken. The first shockwaves slammed into Michigan like a thunderclap, but the damage didn't stop there. Cracks spread quickly across Ohio, Indiana, and Pennsylvania, gutting towns once fueled by industrial muscle. Where gears used to grind and foremen used to shout, now there was only silence, deep, heavy, and final. Outside the shuttered Stellantis plants, United Auto Workers leaders stood with bullhorns in hand and fury in their eyes, launching emergency strikes not as a calculated move but as a last-ditch act of desperation. Their picket signs read, "Built in America, buried by tariffs." Chants echoed through the cold air. Campfires flickered in rusted 50-gallon drums. But management never came. There was no one to bargain with, because there was nothing left to negotiate. These weren't temporary layoffs. The jobs were simply gone. Suppliers were hit even harder and faster. Steel mills in western Pennsylvania extinguished their furnaces overnight, dreams turning to slag in the dark. In Kentucky, glass manufacturers laid off entire shifts with nothing more than a voicemail. An electronics plant in Indiana that once built dashboard systems for Jeep shut down without warning. Over 2,000 workers were left stunned, severance denied, health benefits cancelled by the following morning. Local mayors flooded Washington with urgent appeals for relief. Governors, both red and blue, issued joint statements, but the White House stood firm. Trump's inner circle repeated the same cold mantra. Short-term pain for long-term sovereignty. To them, it was patriotic medicine. To Wall Street, it was something else entirely. Economic self-destruction. One analyst summed it up bluntly in a leaked memo. Self-inflicted collapse. The suffering didn't stop at the gates of closed factories. It spilled onto farms, back roads, and main streets, into the daily routines of farmers, truckers, and small business owners who had long depended on Stellantis-made Ram trucks to power their work. With supply lines frozen, those trucks quickly turned from reliable tools to oversized paperweights. Engines failed. Transmissions stalled. Brakes wore down. Replacement parts were nowhere to be found. Dealerships couldn't help. Mechanics were helpless. Promises from corporate dried up. Across America, Stellantis showrooms became eerie museums of dysfunction. Dodge, Jeep, and Ram dealers resembled ghost towns. Glass temples filled with vehicles no one trusted and even fewer could afford. Trucks that sold for $45,000 just a year earlier now pushed past $60,000, not because of demand, but because of tariffs. Even loyal customers walked away, shaken by sticker shock and instability. Sales staff tried to maintain optimism, but with each passing week, floor traffic vanished. Forecasts were quietly torn up. Over 500 dealerships reported days with zero sales, an almost unthinkable scenario in modern auto retail. It wasn't inflation that killed the market, it was confusion and chaos, a system jammed by policy decisions no one could navigate. Warranty claims went unanswered. Technicians were laid off. Phone calls to Stellantis headquarters fell into endless voicemail loops. Emails bounced. Franchise owners watched their balance sheets bleed, uncertain whether to hold on or walk away. In a final act of defiance, nearly 300 dealerships banded together and filed a lawsuit against Stellantis. The claim? Breach of contract. abandonment. But many said it wasn't just about money. It was about betrayal. In North Carolina, a Dodge dealership reached its breaking point. Surveillance footage, later aired on national news, showed a group of recently laid-off employees storming the showroom in broad daylight. They smashed display windows, spray-painted the word traitor across windshields, and left handwritten cardboard signs that read, "You left us first." The video went viral and struck a deep nerve. These weren't vandals. They were parents, mechanics, finance clerks, people who had built their livelihoods around Stellantis. The emotional dam had finally burst. Meanwhile, lenders were drowning in a tidal wave of bad debt. Truck owners saddled with six-figure loans began defaulting en masse. Auto finance companies scrambled to repossess vehicles. Recovery agents worked overtime, but for every Ram truck they towed, 2 more sat abandoned on gravel lots, too expensive to sell, too costly to maintain. And then the match was lit. In a highly anticipated appearance, Trump took the stage in Ohio, flanked by Americans, flags, blue-collar supporters in hard hats, and the theatrical bravado of a man leaning into chaos. What was meant to be a reassurance became a declaration of war. "We are saving American jobs, whether the globalists like it or not," he thundered. "And if Stellantis wants to walk away, let them. We'll build better without them." He didn't stop at criticism. He accused Stellantis of betrayal, even treason, claiming they had conspired with foreign powers. He promised to punish any company that offshored operations, teasing sweeping legislation that would blacklist offenders. From federal contracts and government incentives, the crowd erupted, the country recoiled. When reporters asked about the economic fallout, the layoffs, the lawsuits, the factory closures, Trump snapped, "Fake numbers, fake news." The soundbite hit national TV within minutes. Social media ignited. Hashtags like "Metrarns boycott Stellantis," "Narco-tariff traitor," and "Buy American only" began trending. Influencers joined the fray. YouTubers uploaded angry reaction videos. A viral TikTok showed a young couple abandoning their Ram truck in front of a dealership, racking up 10 million views in just 2 days. But beneath the fury, a colder truth settled in. There were no quick fixes, no American factories waiting in the wings. The supply chain was broken. The trucks weren't coming. And even the most patriotic flag-waving felt hollow against a backdrop of empty lots, unpaid mortgages, and vanished paychecks. Then came an international twist. In a press conference, broadcast from Ottawa, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney addressed the growing turmoil with calm precision. Speaking directly to disillusioned American workers, he extended a striking offer: accelerated work visas, job retraining programs, and employment opportunities in Canada's growing manufacturing sector. "If your country won't invest in you," he said, "we will." It was a seismic contrast. While Trump issued threats to corporations, Carney opened his arms to workers. And with that, the rift between nationalism and pragmatism deepened. One man closing doors, the other building bridges. The image of Canadian flags being hoisted while American ones hung tattered in the wind wasn't lost on global media. And as the US unraveled, Mexico made its own move. In Mexico City, government officials filed a formal complaint with the World Trade Organization, denouncing Trump's tariffs as unilateral economic aggression. The legal filing framed the move as a blatant violation of international trade agreements and demanded immediate arbitration. But what unfolded on the ground was even more unexpected. In the industrial hubs of Toluca and Saltillo, Stellantis workers staged spontaneous solidarity strikes. Photos of Mexican auto workers holding bilingual signs, "We build together," and "El futuro, no fronteras," spread quickly online. It was a striking display of cross-border unity, but it didn't last. Within 48 hours, Stellantis began replacing striking workers with non-union labor. Job listings popped up overnight, charter buses rolled in, production resumed at full throttle, not for the US, but for Europe, Asia, and South America. The message was clear. Stellantis had moved on. Mexico's government, outraged by the ACE, corporate betrayal, escalated its rhetoric. "This isn't economic policy," one trade minister said. "It's colonialism wrapped in a flag." Behind the scenes, Mexican officials began coordinating with Canada and European allies to isolate US supply chains, quietly turning a trade war into a global siege. Back in Detroit, the atmosphere inside Ford and GM boardrooms grew tense. Publicly, the automakers said nothing. Privately, they were placing quiet calls to Monterrey and Cordoba, probing their own southern escape routes. If Stellantis could shift production and survive, maybe they could too. And it wasn't just autos. Executives from Deere, Caterpillar, even Tesla began flooding Capitol Hill with private memos. Not because they rejected the idea of national sovereignty, but because they feared economic collapse. These weren't protests. They were corporate SOS signals. Some still believed in reshoring, but none were prepared to sacrifice the entire system for a political gamble. Not even for the flag. Not even for Trump. Then came the second wave. Stellantis didn't just pause investments in America. It reversed them. Peugeot, Citroën, Fiat, all under the Stellantis umbrella, cancelled US expansion plans within 72 hours of the tariff announcement. American marketing campaigns vanished overnight. Job listings disappeared. Lease agreements for logistics centers from Texas to New Jersey were terminated. A new term started circulating in boardrooms and trade circles: reverse offshoring. It no longer meant American jobs going abroad. Now it meant foreign companies fleeing the American market entirely. And Stellantis wasn't alone. Other European automakers began scaling down their US presence quietly, strategically. Opel shelved its long-anticipated re-entry into America. Renault indefinitely postponed its EV launch. The dominoes were falling fast. In just 90 days, more than 40,000 jobs connected to the auto industry evaporated. Parts suppliers shut entire departments. Warehouses fell silent. Port authorities reported a sharp drop in inbound automotive shipments. Rail networks slowed to a crawl. A silent spread, not just through factories, but through the arteries of an entire economic ecosystem now buckling under the weight of a single policy shift. The leaked emails were damning. Stellantis executives had moved beyond quiet withdrawal. They were now actively urging the European Union to strike back. The plan: retaliatory sanctions against the United States. Cold, calculated, and ruthless. If America wanted to wage an economic war, the EU would bleed US exports in return. And the damage was just beginning. Canada's revenge was no less precise. While Washington scrambled to contain the economic hemorrhage, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney executed a diplomatic masterstroke. In a confidential meeting in Toronto, he gathered top trade envoys from Mexico, Germany, and the European Union. The pitch was sharp and strategic. The US had destabilized the continent. It was time to build around it, not with it. The result was historic. Days later, Carney unveiled the North American Fair Trade Pact, a trilateral agreement between Canada, Mexico, and the EU that deliberately excluded the United States. The pact offered streamlined logistics, slashed customs red tape, and fast-tracked industrial trade lanes. It was a bold declaration of economic independence from Washington's volatility.